when I woke up, very confused. She said, "You almost died last night. In fact, no one can believe you were alive."
I went into the games not knowing what was coming.
As humans, we just hate uncertainty.
You just sensed that it was out there.
You have to start somewhere.
We're all programmed to push ourselves even farther.
This is On the X, an IRONCLAD original. Welcome to On the X. I'm Chris Irwin, and today my guest is Gary Sinise. Gary is an award-winning actor, humanitarian, and advocate for veterans. He's probably best known for his iconic role as Lieutenant Dan in Forrest Gump, as well as other films like Apollo 13, The Green Mile, and Ransom, and TV shows like CSI New York. He is an Emmy, Golden Globe, and SAG Award winner, and he's also a musician. In 2003, he formed the Lieutenant Dan Band to perform for troops worldwide. Gary is passionate about giving back to military causes, and in 2011, he founded the Gary Sinise Foundation to support veterans and first responders. He's the recipient of numerous humanitarian awards, including the Presidential Citizens Medal and the Congressional Medal of Honor Society's Patriot Award. And his best-selling autobiography, Grateful American, chronicles his journey from actor to advocate. I think you'll hear in our discussion that Gary just has a heart of gold, and I thoroughly enjoyed speaking with him. So here we go with Gary Sinise on the X. I've been listening to your book, Grateful American, and learned so much about you that I didn't know. And by the way, I appreciate you reading it. I will never understand why some people don't read their own books. I guess some people aren't into that, but I think certainly with someone in your position as a public figure like you, and it's a memoir, obviously, so you kind of have to do that. But just going back to kind of what set you on the path that you were on, it was really interesting to learn that acting kind of, I want to say, saved you to a certain extent as a kid, where you kind of talk about how you're sort of not into school, you're not into any of this thing, and acting was something where it didn't seem like, anyway, hearing your words, that you set out like, I'm going to become an actor and I'm going to make all this money and everything. It almost like fell in your lap and gave you, to me, it sounded like it gave you a sense of two things: community and a purpose. Is that accurate? What was it about acting that sort of changed the trajectory of your life as a young person?
Yeah, well, it was, I don't know, maybe it was destiny or maybe it was an accident. I don't know, but I happened to be, struggling quite a bit in high school, trying to find my way, and just one day was standing in this hallway, and the drama teacher walked down the hall and told me to come and audition for West Side Story, which she was directing. It was like going to be the spring musical of the high school that year. I went to Highland Park High School in Highland Park, Illinois. And I academically all the way through school, I didn't learn the fundamentals as a young, first, second, third grader very well, reading and writing and arithmetic and all that. I just struggled. And so I struggled as a kind of junior high schooler and high schooler, but I played music and had my first guitar in fourth grade, played all the way up through seventh and eighth grade and into high school, and was playing with a rock band. And we all happened to be standing in the hallway together looking pretty scruffy. And so, West Side Story is about the two gangs, and they're fighting on stage and, all that stuff. So she thought we looked good for the gang members. So she told us to come audition, and two of us did. I went with, I was the guitar player in that particular band, and the bass player, and we both went and auditioned for the play, and we both got in the play. And he was a jet and I was a shark. And that turned my life around completely. All of a sudden, and I had liked performing, because I liked playing in music and the bands and everything. So I enjoyed kind of being in front of the audiences, but the play thing and just falling in love with being on stage and working with the group and finding this theater community in high school, that really set me on a different course in high school. So after that, I wanted to take all the theater classes. I wanted to be in all the plays that I could. And I did all the way through high school. I just kept working and working and working in plays. The grades only got better in my theater classes. The grades were never any good. But all of a sudden I was taking, drama one and technical theater and, whatever the classes were. And all of a sudden I was getting like really good grades in all these theater classes where my other grades were just not very good at all, history and, science, all those things. I just, I couldn't study. I had a hard time reading and comprehending things, but I could memorize. It turned out I could memorize lines and then spit them out on stage and kind of be entertaining and kind of a goof off.
Yeah.
And so, this kind of sort of academically challenged kid went from, somebody who was nearly going to get kicked out of school to somebody who was like performing in all the plays all the time. And I remember some of my other teachers from the other classes, and I write about this in my book, I think for sure, like the history teacher or the English teacher, what they would come and see me in these shows, and they would know how challenged I was in their classes, just not being able to do homework and not being able to kind of know what I was doing in their classes. And then they would come and see me on stage, and I was just like kicking butt on stage. And all of a sudden they saw this kid who was really just not a good student, but a great, really good performer on stage. And by the time I was done with high school, I just, that's all I wanted to do.
Yeah.
was be an actor.
And is it the ability to step into a role that really appealed to you? Is it this sort of the feedback you got from the audience? What was the kind of the draw, like what made it so enjoyable for you?
I think it was a combination of things. One was I like to pretend, and like even in my bands, I was pretending I was, Jimi Hendrix or
yeah, sure,
whoever I was pretending to be up there on stage with the guitar or the bass or whatever it was. And on stage, I kind of fell in love with pretending. And pretending to be something different than what I was. I played a lot of different roles in high school, we had a very, very good drama teacher and a very good drama department. And she was the drama teacher. Her name is Barbara Patterson. And I write about her in the book because she was significant in kind of just giving me the courage to just go with my gut instincts about things.
Yeah.
And so I was somebody who was kind of acting on instinct versus somebody who was being taught different techniques and ways that you're supposed to, approach acting and all of that. I was just kind of going on my intuitive sort of gut feeling about things. And it was working, and it was a little bit different than some of the other students and everything. And she recognized that. And so she encouraged it and nurtured it. And by the time I got out of high school, I was just, kind of sort of a do-it-yourself kind of guy. And that's why I ended up starting a theater company after high.
Yeah, so
within minutes of graduating.
So talk about that. So I don't come from a theater background at all, and I had not heard of the Steppenwolf Theater Company. But you go on, like you just said, after high school, you formed this theater company in Chicago that is still in operation today, correct?
Yeah, that was 50 years ago. I graduated in January of 74, 50 years ago.
Yeah.
And within a month or two, we had started Steppenwolf Theater. So it's 50 years old now. And, if you look at it, it was started by kids. And then you go to Chicago and you see this gigantic multi-million-dollar building that is there with multiple theaters in it, classrooms, bars and restaurants, all this stuff. It's a real cultural center, and it all started with just a bunch of kids that wanted to do some plays.
And so
it's a great story.
It's a great story. So what made it work? Because this is something obviously that tons of people want to do. They want to go, no, maybe it's not theater, but they want to go out and start a business that has that kind of staying power and is that successful. So What was unique and special about the group you had, or the personalities involved, or this, the steps you took there, the decisions you made?
Yeah, there were a couple of factors. One is that we didn't want to do anything else.
Okay. Yep. Sure.
So when you don't want to do anything else, you're willing to sacrifice like all kinds of things in order to do that, right? One of those things, what are the options for an actor coming out of high school or college? You go to New York, you go to Los Angeles, try to get in the movie business. You go to New York, try to do Broadway or whatever it is. You go to those centers. Minneapolis at the time was one of those places. Had the Guthrie Theater up there and a nice theater community there. When we started Steppenwolf in Chicago, there were very few what you would consider, in New York, you have Broadway and then you have off-Broadway, which are these tiny little theaters that just popped up in a little building or whatever somewhere. In Chicago, you would have the big downtown theaters, which I don't know if you know Chicago, but there's an area in Chicago in the city that's called the Loop. And it's inside sort of where the train goes, right?
Okay.
And the Loop, you've got a bunch of these big, gigantic sort of Broadway style theaters there. So in those days, back in the 70s, there were very few what I would call what we called off Loop theaters versus off Broadway theaters, right? Got the big giant houses, and then some small little places that popped up. Joe Mantegna had one of those. He was involved with one of those small theaters as well back in those days. David Mamet came out of that, that off-loop Chicago theater thing, and we did. But there were very few, so there weren't a lot of options, in Chicago. So we, I wasn't going to go to college. I didn't want to go to New York. I didn't want to go to Los Angeles, but I wanted to continue doing what we were doing in high school. So we just got some kids together and found a church space that my parents had some friends who were actually the architects of this. It was a Unitarian church it was actually in Deerfield, Illinois, right on the border between Deerfield and Highland Park and Highwood, this area that I lived in. And they let us use the space. And we were a bunch of kids, and they said we said, couldn't we put on a play in there? And they said yes. And that was in probably February or March of 1974 when we did the first play there. And then there was another play and another play. And then we took up residence in the basement of a closed down Catholic school that had this big basement space where we actually built an 88-seat theater in there. It had 3 rows, very small stage, but we took up residence in there. And that's when John Malkovich joined, Laurie Metcalf, Joan Allen, a whole, my co-founders of that were Terry Kinney and Jeff Perry. They've all gone on. They have wonderful careers in theater and TV and movies. And we just started working in there for no money. So we were willing to sacrifice making money doing what we were doing in order to have control over what we were doing. So everybody would just get day jobs. I worked on the loading dock at Neiman Marcus. I worked as a gardener there's a big outdoor festival there called Ravinia Festival. And where, they have concerts, big concerts. The Chicago Symphony plays there, but it has a lot of land and it needed a lot of leaves to be raked and grass to be cut. And so that's what I did as a kid. And then I would go to the theater at night, and we'd all meet up after our day jobs and go to the theater at night and rehearse our plays and work on our work. And again, nobody made any money doing it for quite a long time. We were willing to sort of make those sacrifices in order to have control over what we were doing. We could pick the plays, we could direct ourselves, we could we could chart our own course. And it, for us, we hung in there
Yeah.
through a lot of really difficult moments where it looked like we were done, and we made it through. And now you look at Steppenwolf, and it's got this little history that goes back to kids with no money at all to this giant multi-million-dollar building.
Is this something that do you ever think about, like, can this happen again, like these days? And I mean that in a couple of ways. I mean, I think of like my own kids in school, and luckily we have a school system that is very much supportive of the arts and of athletics. But in a lot of places, those types of things are even getting chopped away, where it's like, hey, we can't do this, we can't do that. We're going to focus on sort of STEM and just basic, whatever it is, mathematics and English and that kind of thing. And it just seems to me like your story is so highlighting of, and we need people, successful people in all walks of life. Obviously we need scientists, and we need engineers, and we need lawyers, and we need electricians, and we need artists too. And I'm just curious, do you ever worry about that at all? Like, do you feel like we're still set up as a society to promote that, like from a young age too, so we can get people like you that are able to do that kind of thing?
What's kind of disappointing is that when you hear that music programs are being cut,
yes,
or art programs are being cut at high schools and whatnot, versus maintaining the sports programs or maintaining the academic programs or whatever, as if music and art and whatnot are not important to life. But just imagine life without it.
Yes.
What if there were no musicians? What if there were no music? What if there were no composers? Our life would be very sterile. Look at what music does to all of us. We can all put on a song, and it'll take us back to some time in our past, and we'll start crying because it's so emotional listening to that piece of music and relating to something in our own lives. If music is what, that music is so much a part of our life.
Yeah.
It's so important to just nurturing our spirits that I think, I'm always saddened when I hear that some music program is being cut, or they really just have minimal attention paid to it, very small programs, because these things can be, it can benefit all of us. Just think of all the doctors that are out there that listen to music.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
I mean, there are doctors that are operating on somebody while they've got their headphones on, and they're listening to some piece of music that calms them or soothes them or
100%.
puts them in the zone, and that's an important thing. Music is critically important to all our lives everywhere. And it's the universal language, really.
Yes.
You can go anywhere in the world and start playing some music, and people anywhere in the world will start to relate to it.
Yeah.
And it brings us together in a beautiful way.
I totally agree. Yeah. Yeah. There's a line, I'll botch it a little bit, from Dead Poets Society, Robin Williams, who says, it's always stuck with me. It's something like, lawyers, doctors, like, these are noble professions and necessary for sustaining life, but like art, poetry, music, these are the things we live for. And I've always thought that was such a great way to encapsulate that idea. And so correct.
It's absolutely true. What if Michelangelo and Da Vinci and,
yes.
What if they had never created all those things that have lasted for centuries?
Yes, exactly.
And given so multi-millions of human beings joy and inspiration and everything, and just looking back to what they did all those years ago, and they've sustained. I mean, the music that Beethoven wrote and Mozart wrote, and those pieces have lasted through the centuries.
Yeah.
And there's a reason for it, because we need it.
Yeah.
We need it as human beings.
Yeah, for sure. So as you're coming up with this theater company, you have this other passion that is kind of developing alongside of it, or I'd love for you to get into exactly where it came about, of sort of giving back and this idea, this sort of gratitude for the military and for veterans. And it even sort of works its way into the Steppenwolf Theater production, where you put on this production of this play called Tracers, and you talk about like how important that was to you. So where did that develop for you? This gratitude and this wanting to give back. Where did that come from?
Yeah, there's multiple things along the way, Chris, that just different steps, that all of a sudden kind of galvanized into one big, move toward taking action and doing something. I think I was teed up in a way because of the veterans in my own family on both my side and my wife's side. I've got World War I, my grandfather, World War II, my two uncles. My dad served in the Navy during Korea. My wife's side of the family, Vietnam veterans. Her sister was in the Army, served during the Cold War, married a Vietnam veteran. They had a son. He served in the Army for 13 years, 2 tours to Afghanistan. Just a lot of stuff on both sides of my family that started me off. And I think it was probably back in the 70s and 80s when I met my wife, Moira, and she introduced me to her brothers that I write about in Grateful American. They had a pretty profound effect on me just as a young guy, because I'd never really met, my dad was in the Navy, but he got out of the Navy about 10 days after I was born. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't like I grew up around military stuff. And my grandfather, he was a World War I veteran, but he never talked about World War I. That was not something he talked about. So I never talked to him. And then my uncle Jerry served in World War II. He moved to Texas, so we only rarely saw him. So I never talked to him about World War II. But I did get to spend some time with my uncle Jack, who was my dad's older brother, who was a B-17 navigator in World War II. And I did get to spend some good time with Uncle Jack, but it was only after it was only after September 11th and when I started really getting involved in everything that I said, wait a minute, I've never really talked to my Uncle Jack about World War II. I got to get together with him. So I started taking my Uncle Jack everywhere I went. I would take him to the National Memorial Day concert in Washington when I started being the co-host of that. I would take Uncle Jack with me to send him down to the National World War II Museum, take him to concerts that I was doing. We took him on a flight on a B-17, surprised him with that flight. And I just started spending some good time with Uncle Jack because I wanted to take advantage of that. But it was really, I would say it was really the veterans on my wife's side of the family, the Vietnam veterans, that had the most profound effect on me, because I was just a little younger than they were, really, when they went off to Vietnam. I mean, I was just years younger. Combat operations in Vietnam ended in 73, and that's when I was a senior in high school at that point.
Right. Yep. Okay.
So, then I met her in 1975, 6, and she introduced me to her brothers. I started talking to them. One was a helicopter pilot in Vietnam. He got out of the service after Vietnam. The other was a West Pointer, and he was still in the service when I met him. And that was Mac, Boyd McCanna Harris. And, I didn't spend a lot of, he died in 1983, unfortunately, of cancer. But between 76 and 83, the times that I spent with him were very, very impactful. And I'd never met anyone quite like him, spit-shined leader guy, just on his way to 4-star general. I mean, that's the kind of guy he was. And if you look at his history and his background, Chris, he died when he was lieutenant colonel. But if you look at the impact that he made on the Army, and he's honored all over the place, there's no doubt that he would have been right along Tommy Franks and
Yep.
Folks that were leading the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. They were about the same age. And there's no doubt if you just look at Mac's history, he's in the Fort Leavenworth Hall of Fame. You don't get that without earning it. They honor him every year by presenting an award in his name at Fort Leavenworth and at West Point to a young cadet. So an outstanding student at Leavenworth, typically a major, probably will get the Lieutenant Colonel Boyd McKenna Harris award, and same thing at West Point, an Excellence in Leadership award to a young cadet, named after my brother-in-law. So I have no doubt that he was on his way to big things. Unfortunately, he got diagnosed with cancer in '83. I was at the funeral. I remember all that. So the Vietnam veterans really impacted me quite a bit. I learned quite a lot from them, just about going off to war and then coming home and having a really tough time coming back.
Yeah.
The way the country was at that time, a very divided nation over whether we should be in Vietnam at all. And the Vietnam veteran just got crapped on.
Yep.
And it was a tough time for them. I think it was easier probably for my brother-in-law, Mac, than it was for my brother-in-law, Arthur, because Mac stayed in the service. Arthur got out. And so he struggled quite a bit. He's still alive, somewhat of a recluse. But he just seems happy, but he kind of, he's one of those Vietnam veterans who just chose to sort of isolate a little bit.
On the X is proudly presented by Mechanics Wear, the gloves trusted by pros. Originally designed by a legendary race mechanic, Mechanics Wear has become the top choice for anyone who needs tough, reliable protection. From construction sites to the front lines, these gloves offer unbeatable comfort, durability, and grip. Stay cool, dry, and in control with Mechanics Wear. Gear up for whatever comes your way. And just speaking personally, Mechanics gloves were the go-to glove for us in the military, certainly. And they're still my go-to glove when it comes to just working around the house. Glove that I've worn for decades at this point, and is still kind of my go-to glove. Mechanics Wear gloves are available at most retailers, as well as on mechanics.com and on GSA Advantage. Mechanics Wear is also proud to offer an exclusive 15% off discount through the ID.me program to military, veterans, and first responders. Click on the ID.me button in your shopping cart and follow the steps to verify your eligibility. As you're thinking about all this, the same time kind of your theater company is doing very well and starts to do better and better. You talk about in your book where you get your kind of first New York show with True West that like really kind of opens some doors for you, and then you move on to eventually movies, and we'll get to that. While this is going on with you, though, are you thinking in the back of your mind, I've got to do something to give back through this, or is that something that came along later? Was there an inkling in your head of like, okay, at some point I'm going to start a nonprofit as you've done, or were you just like, I know I got to do something here, I just don't know how to do it quite yet?
I think it was later, because I think the 80s and the 90s were kind of setting the stage for something that would happen later.
Yeah.
Because in the 80s, you mentioned that play Tracers.
Yeah.
Well, that was a desire to find a piece of material that would speak to the Vietnam veteran issues, because of the Vietnam veterans in my family that I had met. And I just started to get to know them and get to hear some of their stories. And I thought, I need, what can I do? I'm feeling very guilty that, I was so unaware as a young person in high school during the Vietnam War as to what people that were, not much older than I was, were doing in the jungles of Vietnam. I mean, there were, tough stuff going on. And I would see it on television because that war was on television all the time. And the news, it was every week, you'd get 500 to 1,000 KIA, and then multiple wounded. And it was getting bad, and there were the protests all over the country over the war, and the country was just being torn apart by that war. There was no way to ignore it. Yet I would see it on television and whatnot, and then I'd go back to my guitar playing and my girls, and the theater stuff and everything like that. And it was really those Vietnam veterans in my wife's family that started to make me think, wait a minute, gosh, I was living through this while they were in the jungles, and I was totally unaware. So I had this sort of guilty feeling as I got to know them. And so I started to think, I want to do something to speak to the Vietnam veteran experience and to do something for us. So I started looking for a piece of material that I could direct.
Yeah.
And I found that play, which at the time, 1980, 79, 80, right around in there, it had been created and was being performed by a group of Vietnam veterans.
Yeah.
Only a few of them had acted before or done anything with theater before. The rest of them were just Vietnam veterans. One of the guys, a guy named John DeFusco, John put an ad in the paper saying, I'm creating a play about Vietnam. I'm looking for Vietnam veterans. Come and talk to me. And so he put together this group of Vietnam veterans, and they started talking about their experiences and just reliving them, and John would, write it. And they ended up writing a play that they ended up performing on stage.
Yeah.
So you had a bunch of Vietnam veterans who weren't writers and weren't actors, who had written this play and were performing this play.
Yeah.
And I read about it in Chicago, and I'm looking for it. It was being performed in Los Angeles. I'm looking for something to speak to the Vietnam veteran experience. I got on a plane and I flew out to California, where my parents were living. They had moved from Chicago a few years earlier. And so I went and stayed with them, and I went and saw this play like 2 nights in a row. And I was completely knocked out by it, so moved by it, begged the guys to let me do it. They didn't want to let me do it because they thought, this is a veteran thing. You're not a veteran. We don't want veterans to do it. And they kept putting me off, and I kept calling, and they kept putting me off. I kept calling. And finally, I talked to John DeFusco, and I said, well, come out here to Chicago and see this play that we're doing right now. And then you'll know what our theater company is. And then you can decide if you don't want us to do it or not. But stop putting me off. Come on out. So I paid for him to come out. The theater did. And we had a little bit of money, not a lot, but we could bring John out. I brought him out, and we were doing this play called Balm in Gilead. That it was a big show with about 30 people in it. John Malkovich directed it. I was in it. The whole company was in it. It was a powerhouse show, just killer show. And after that, John said, okay, you can do it. He thought these guys are good. Let's just take a chance. So I ended up directing the play we started working on it in 83, and in early 84, the play opened. I had a couple of Vietnam veterans in it. But most of the cast were not Vietnam veterans. But that experience of doing it, and the Vietnam veterans that started to hear about it and come to see the play, really opened up a lot of things. And we started giving away free tickets. Every Tuesday night was Veterans Night. So we'd have 200 veterans in the audience just howling, Vietnam veterans howling at the funny stuff, funny, goofy stuff from Vietnam. And then, really blown away by the other stuff. And they would just jump out of their seats at the end and come right up on the stage, start hugging the actors. It was just a very profound, impactful, and very moving moment that galvanized a lot of things for me back then. I ended up helping local Vietnam veterans build a Vietnam Veteran Memorial after that. That is still there, Lansing Veterans Memorial in Lansing, Illinois. And that set the stage, I think, for what happened in the 90s when, I was so tuned into the Vietnam thing. Along comes Lieutenant Dan.
Right.
I get to audition for him. And, there you go.
Yeah. Just real quick before we get into that, because obviously we want to get into Lieutenant Dan and how that completely sort of brought you on everybody's radar, and certainly changed things for you. But on that story about tracers, I think what I love so much about that story is it sort of highlights what we're talking about arts and music and these things and how therapeutic and healing those can be, because I guarantee the production of that play for those Vietnam veterans was therapeutic. Not right, like being able to do that, being able to process emotionally what they've experienced, all of that, and then being able to get together with a group like yours and like bring the two ends together, so to speak, right? I just think so too often we put ourselves into these categories of like, we're veterans and these people are not veterans, and it's like, yeah, but we're all on the same team here. We're all Americans, and like the more we can sort of interact and like talk about these things and be open about them and be vulnerable. I just think that that's such a great healing story that speaks to the power of the arts and what it can do for people.
No question, Chris. That's what was so kind of cathartic and moving and impactful about having all these veterans come to see the show.
Yeah.
We would have post-show discussions, and the veterans would just open up, and one would be sitting next to his wife, and he'd start talking about stuff that the play made him think about that he'd never talked to his wife about. And all of a sudden these things are coming out. Very, very impactful and very powerful. There's a documentary on my foundation website.
Mm-hmm.
In the merchandise store. It's called Always Do a Little More. And it tracks it, the video guys in my foundation. I talked to them and we just decided, the foundation grew from a lot of years ago, of stuff like I'm talking to you about. Why don't you go ahead and track some of that history? So they tracked it. My family history, they tracked, the tracers stuff and the impactful moments there. There was one moment that's in the documentary where a television crew from WTTW in Chicago wanted to do a show on this Vietnam play Tracers. They brought the cameras in after the show, set up the cameras on stage. We had a group of Vietnam veterans that had seen the play, and some of my cast members and me, all sitting there talking about what this play meant to each of us, what it meant to me, what it meant to the cast members, what it meant to the Vietnam veterans who had seen the play and what it made them think about. One guy starts talking about something that he'd never talked about that was really difficult. And he says it right there on camera. And it was tough. It was tough. But the play did something, I think, hopeful for them. And a lot of these guys would come back week after week after week to see it again and again and again.
Yeah.
That was like a galvanizing moment. When you ask me, how I got into all the other things, you can look back at you can pinpoint these moments that galvanized, that were seeds that grew into a big tree.
Yeah.
Later on.
Yeah.
And that was one of the big seeds.
For sure.
Back then. I'll never forget that. We went to the VA and spent time sitting there with guys that were struggling with post-traumatic stress, and and we would sit there and they would talk to us. This is before the play opened, when we were just preparing for the play. And they would talk to us and share some really tough stuff, and it woke my cast up. I mean, it got the attention of my cast. All of a sudden, I was trying to get the cast to sort of feel the way I felt about, the passionate commitment to tell this story the right way. And by the end of our preparation, the cast was ready. And now we're experiencing the play through the Vietnam veterans that we're seeing. It was very, very impactful.
Yeah, that's awesome. What a great story. So fast forwarding a little bit there, right? So Steppenwolf is getting more and more successful. Like I said, you had a very successful show now kind of on Broadway in New York with True West, and your doors are opening, and you eventually get this role, Lieutenant Dan, this kind of like iconic role. How did that how'd it come about? Was it something where you were like, I have to get this role because of it being a Vietnam veteran? And did you know when it came along too, like with the movie, that this is going to be something, like this is going to be something special?
Well, if I don't know if you remember this part, or maybe you haven't gotten there yet in my book, but in the 80s, we had, the play that I mentioned, Balm and Gilead,
Mm-hmm.
big play that Malkovich directed, and I was in it and everything like that. We eventually moved that to New York. It was a big show. We had to partner up with another theater in New York called Circle Repertory, and we ended up doing the play there. It was downtown, and it was very, very powerful. And I was doing that. I did that show for like 9 months or something like that. We were there for a long time, and during that period of time, I found out, I started to get an agent and stuff like that when I was there. During that period of time, and I'd done Tracers like right before we moved this show. So Tracers was running, and then we moved Balm and Gilead. It was a big time for us. And I got an agent, I think, who was kind of sending me around here and there on some auditions when I was there. And I found out about this one audition for a movie that somebody was making about Vietnam. And, I'd just been submerged in Vietnam, right? And so I was like, I got to get an audition for that. And it was Oliver Stone.
Oh.
Oliver Stone was making his movie about his Vietnam experience. It's called Platoon.
Yeah. And
I got an audition for it. And I auditioned for it, and I heard that, I was being considered. But then all of a sudden, what I was told at the time, I'd have to ask Oliver this if I ever see him again. But their money fell out.
Okay.
Like they had somebody who was going to finance it, and then the money fell out. So the project just kind of went on hold and nothing happened. It eventually came out in, later in the 80s. But by that time I was off doing, whatever I was doing. But I really, really wanted to be in Platoon. Yes. I was like, I just lived through I'm so submerged in Vietnam. I really wanted to do it. Then it didn't happen. The movie came out, won some Oscars, did really well, was good movie. Then a bunch of other movies started being made about, if you recall, kind of, I think The Deer Hunter was actually maybe a little bit before Platoon, or maybe around the same time.
I think it was before.
There was a movie, Coming Home, with John Voight, that was made about Vietnam. Casualties of War was another one. Apocalypse Now. All these movies were being made about Vietnam. And then along, about 10 years later, whatever it was, I'm now, I've done a little bit of work in Hollywood. I made a movie of Mice and Men. Of Mice and Men, didn't do well at the box office, but it did well for me because it was a good movie. It turned out really well. And I directed it and produced it and acted in it. So it kind of caught the attention of some of the Hollywood folks and everything. And so I was able to get some pretty good auditions at that point. And one of them was to play Lieutenant Dan. And I read it and I thought, oh, maybe this is going to be my Vietnam movie that I should have done all those years ago. And so I went in, I auditioned for it. And what do you do? What do you do when you audition? You audition for it. You go in, you read the part, you give it your all, you do your thing, and then you leave the audition, and within 15 or 20 minutes, you're calling your agent to see if anybody called. You know, did they like me? You know, what, I really want to do this. Yeah, they liked you, and you did a great job, and you know, they're just looking at a lot of different people and that kind of thing, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
So it was like that, you know. Oh, they're gonna, you know, just keep looking and checking out. So, you know, some weeks went by, and I went on and auditioned for some other things, but then it came back around, and all of a sudden I got a call that, hey, you got the part, and that was a big moment for sure, and. You know, I felt even 10 years after doing the Tracer thing, I was still very much tuned in, you know, because of my, you know, my wife's brothers, my brother-in-law, you know, all of that. Still tuned into the Vietnam experience and what it was like to go off and serve and come home and all of that. And I was still very compassionate about that whole thing. So really wanted to play the part. Lucky to get it. Glad I did, because it affected a lot of good things.
Yeah. Were you nervous at all about how to portray that character? Because it's a disabled veteran, and that eventually becomes a disabled veteran. And I have to imagine that could be tricky, certainly, depending on how people receive it. Did you think about that? And was the character, I don't know, I'm not an actor, so I don't know any of this, but is that on the page, so to speak? Is it in the writing, or do you have to say, okay, I've got to tweak this way, I've got to bring this out, or I have to like add this flavor to what's written about this character?
You know, fear is a great motivator.
Yeah, it can be, for sure.
And as an actor, that's kind of me. I'm always fearful that I'm going to stumble or miss something or take something for granted that I shouldn't have or something. So I tend, you know, when I get involved in something like that, I tend to do a lot of research, do a lot of searching, you know, a lot of preparation. To make sure that I'm going to, you know, play whatever it is that I'm doing properly and as honestly as I could. And when you're, you know, with Lieutenant Dan, I felt sort of an obligation in a way, a responsibility, as I was playing a wounded veteran, a wounded Vietnam veteran, to honor, you know, those that I had met and those who had helped me, you know, with my play, and the veterans at the VA that I'd met and the veterans in my own family. I felt a real obligation to tell that little story as honestly and faithfully as I could. So I tuned up. I really, you know, went to work on it. I remember one of the books I read when I was doing it was Lewis Puller Jr.'s book.
This is Chesty Puller's son, right?
Yeah, Chesty's son. And I don't know if you know that book. It's called Fortunate Son.
I don't know the book. I mean, I had forgotten about him actually and his story, which is tragic. But yeah, please get into it. Yeah.
Yeah, so he was a Vietnam veteran who got blown up, you know, and lost his legs and one of his arms. And I mean, he struggled with alcohol and all kinds of stuff. And at the same time, he was the son of the greatest Marine of all time.
Right. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, you know, so there's a very sad, powerful story of Chesty, you know, who's this, I mean, it's Chesty Puller, you know, he's like hardcore. And Lewis tells a story of being in a hospital bed and seeing his dad cry over his bed, you know, seeing his son with his legs gone and all that. His legs were just vaporized with a mine that he stepped on. And it was a very powerful read and a powerful book to be reading when I'm about to play a guy who gets blown up and loses his legs and has to go and goes into, you know, alcohol abuse and all that stuff after Vietnam. And so it was a powerful book to be reading at the time. I spent some time, researching the amputation, that part of it,
Mm-hmm.
and making sure I understood the challenges of somebody who lost his legs in battle. We did boot camp stuff, which was kind of cool because backing up a year to Tracers, I wanted to do like a boot camp for Tracers, so I took my cast. We were actually doing the play in January, right? So it was cold as hell in Chicago and in the Midwest, but somebody actually had a relationship with a summer camp that was closed down for the winter, and they said we could use the closed down summer camp to go isolate ourselves and kind of workshop Tracers. So we went and we did sort of a mock military camp, and we set it up. I had the drill instructor who was a wonderful actor. You may remember him, Dennis Farina.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, Dennis was our drill instructor in the show, and I said, Dennis, we're going to go up to this summer camp, and you're going to beat the hell out of us up there. Wake us up in the middle of the night, do whatever you got to do to be the drill instructor, but I want to whip my cast into shape. So we did that for Tracers, and I thought, I sure hope we do that for Lieutenant Dan and the platoon. And sure enough, we did it. We even got, Oliver Stone got a guy named Dale Dye.
Yeah.
Dale was a Marine in Vietnam, and he said, Dale, I want you to be, teach these guys how to be, soldiers. And so they went out and for platoon and lived in the jungle and all of that. So Dale started to build a business where he was like the go-to military tech advisor in town. And anytime there was a military movie, they were calling Dale up to whip the cast into shape. Well, that's what Bob Zemeckis, our director on Forrest Gump, did. He got Dale to whip us into shape. So we went out and lived in the woods for 3 or 4 days, slept out there, bugs and snakes and all that. We were in South Carolina shooting Forrest Gump, and we lived out there. And that was an extremely valuable experience to get prepped to play the lieutenant.
Yeah.
That really, I learned a lot about planning and leadership and all, military leadership, all that kind of stuff, by just having to tell a platoon what to do every day when I was out there.
Yeah.
And Dale worked hard with me on that. So by the time we started shooting Forrest Gump and the military stuff, I don't know if you remember Forrest Gump, but there's a scene where Lieutenant Dan is marching his platoon down the road, and Forrest Gump said, Lieutenant Dan would just tell us to sit down, get down, and shut up. And Lieutenant Dan said, get down, shut up. Well, that was the first scene we shot with the platoon of the Vietnam stuff. So I felt like, okay, we were ready to go, at that point. So the preparation to play Lieutenant Dan was very, very valuable. I never neglect to prep for something that I'm like something that I'm going to step out of myself a lot into something else. I want to always make sure that I'm studying up enough to do it. I played presidents, Harry Truman, and all the. And there's a lot of preparation that goes into playing those kind of parts.
Yeah, for sure. So at what point? So you finished this movie. At what point was it? Right after you had shot it and screened it, where you were like, "This is really different and special," or did it take? Was it the actual reception from people? Like, at what point was it clear that this was kind of a unique film that was different?
Well, we made it we shot it in 93, and we shot a bunch of, we shot the Vietnam stuff, the shrimping, a few other things in Beaufort, South Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
And then I went back to Los Angeles, and the crew went on to Savannah, Georgia, and they went on to some different places. And then they were going to come back to LA, and we were going to finish up the rest of the movie in Los Angeles. So I had a little time off. Good thing, because I was injured on the final day of shooting for me, which was the final day of shooting the Vietnam stuff, was when Forrest Gump carries me.
Oh yeah, yeah. You talked
over his
about this.
shoulder.
Yeah.
And he carries me out of the, bombs are going off and, whatever. He carries me out and dumps me on the riverbank there. Well, we did that. We did, my thigh was on his shoulder here. He had me like that fireman's carry over his shoulder. And my thigh was kind of bouncing up and down on his shoulder, like take after take. And the last take, he set me down and I went to get up at the end of the shot. And I couldn't, my leg just gave out. There was a massive bruise where his shoulder had just like a jackhammer into my thigh. So luckily I had, I had 3 weeks or so back in Los Angeles by myself to rehabilitate that and get ready to play Lieutenant Dan in the wheelchair. And the New York stuff was all shot in Los Angeles on the street. And, some of that other stuff was shot in Los Angeles. We finished up December 93. The movie came out July 6th, 1994. They showed it to us maybe a week or two before it opened. And the nature of that story, and I've said this before, is, if you look at Lieutenant Dan, right, he's a small part of the story. So I didn't really work with Sally Field or Robin Wright. Or,
Right.
One little scene with Sally and Robin, but at the wedding. But worked with Michael T. Williamson a little bit on the Bubba stuff, in the platoon. But most of my work was with Tom. So I really didn't know what Robin or anybody else was doing in the movie.
Yeah, yeah.
When you see the movie and you see it all put together, we all looked at each other at the end of that screening, and everybody was just pretty happy.
Yeah, yeah.
We knew it was good, and then it opened, and it was a big hit.
Yeah. Well, yeah, a huge hit. So what was it? A couple last questions on this, and then I want to talk about your foundation. But because the reception around the character itself, especially from veterans, was so great, right? And so what do you think it was about that? I was trying to think, had there ever been a character like that on screen, that's sort of like where it was not necessarily the main character of the film, but a very, very strong supporting character that was like that? I mean, the only other one that came to mind for me is Tom Cruise in Born on the 4th of July, but I don't even remember what year that came out. But had that just not been portrayed ever in a film to that extent, with that kind of like character arc, so to speak?
Well, you know what's Born on the 4th of July is a different story.
Yes, for sure.
You know what's interesting about the story of Lieutenant Dan and how it evolves, right? You got a guy who's all he wants to do is be a great military leader, right? I mean, you look at Lieutenant Dan at the beginning of that movie, and he's the guy you want leading the platoon, right? And he's also a guy, we thought this is a guy. I always envisioned Lieutenant Dan as going to not West Point, but maybe VMI, wanting to be a military leader, getting sucked into raising his hand for Vietnam. He didn't get drafted, right? He raised his hand for Vietnam. He wanted to be in the Army. He wanted to be a great leader. He wanted to go on and have a great military career, and that gets taken away from him. And like many Vietnam veterans, if you look at the story, I mean, he goes in, he's wounded. He gets taken out of Vietnam. You don't know where he went, what happened to Lieutenant Dan. He shows up and he's down and out in, New York City. And he's isolating himself. He's drinking away. He's hanging out with, hookers. And, I mean, it's just not, he's not doing great. He's not doing great. But by the end of the story, and this is something that we hadn't really seen before in a movie about a Vietnam veteran who, especially, at the end of the story, he's standing up. He's spit shined again in a great suit. He's married, and he's a rich businessman.
Yeah.
And we had not seen a story about a successful recovery from Vietnam
Yep.
in that way ever,
Yeah.
up until that point. Like I said, I mentioned all those other movies. If you look at them, I mean, look at, they're just a lot of sad Vietnam veteran movies out there where, at the end of Deer Hunter, one of them has committed, killed himself in Russian roulette,
Yep.
The other, and you just don't know if the veterans are going to be okay at the end of a lot of those films. But at the end of Forrest Gump, he's successful, and we hadn't seen that story. And that was a story it was a story that happened to a lot of Vietnam veterans, where they were able to kind of put their military stuff behind them, move on, and be successful in life. There were a lot of guys that were able to do that, but the only stories that we were hearing about were the guys that couldn't recover from it and were really struggling and just came back and just didn't know where to turn. So
Yeah.
Forrest Gump was a very positive story for a veteran. That's why I think when I go to the hospitals and I visit so many folks, and they just, that are in the beds and missing limbs and all that kind of stuff, they don't know what they're going to do. Just like Lieutenant Dan at that one scene, Lieutenant Dan says, "What am I going to do now?"
Yeah.
He's looking at his legs and they're gone, and he's just miserable. And what am I going to do now? And a lot of the guys in the hospitals, they're all thinking that same thing, but they all want the same story that Lieutenant Dan had, right? They all want to be walking again, moving on with life and be successful. And that's why I think so many of our veterans kind of responded so positively to the story of Lieutenant Dan.
Yeah. So at what point after that did you, let's kind of shift into your foundation work and your nonprofit work? Because this is where obviously my work and your work sort of finally intersect a little bit. At what point, I mean, it feels to me like that character certainly gave you a lightning rod or an anchor point, certainly, to be able to do some of this, like this nonprofit stuff and giving back in a sense where you had, everyone could see you as this character in certain ways, and it sort of kind of made sense, and you made the most of that, obviously. So at what point did you form this foundation and talk about its mission and the work that you're doing there?
Yeah, Chris. Have you got to the chapter in my book called Turning Point yet?
What chapter is it? I think I'm on chapter 9, I think.
It's after chapter 9.
Okay, sorry. No, I haven't gotten to it yet then.
I think it might be. It's the September 11th chapter.
Okay. Oh, okay. Okay.
Which is, it's a powerful chapter because that was a real moment for me where I kind of started to reflect so much on the Vietnam veterans that I knew who had come home from Vietnam, kind of broken. And we were starting to deploy our troops to Afghanistan and then Iraq, in 2003. And I just started to think, I don't want them to get caught in the same crosshairs, as our Vietnam veterans did. And you could start to see, in the beginning, it was like, okay, let's go get the bad guys in Afghanistan. Let's, we've got to do something to respond to this terrible event. And so we started deploying, and people started getting hurt. We started losing them. And then Iraq in 2003. And then the media perception of that war started to change a lot. And George Bush was in the crosshairs of the media and everything like that. And the war was not going well and blah, blah, blah. And I could it just felt to me like the folks that were deploying in response to the terrorist attacks of 9/11 were now going to be subject to this division in the country, much like our Vietnam veterans were subjected to. this division in the country over whether we should be in Vietnam or not. And so I just started raising my hand at that point, wanting to take some action myself to make sure that they weren't caught up in all that stuff. You know, they were just deploying. You know, they were raising their hand after 9/11 and volunteering to go serve. You know, an honorable thing to react and respond to the bad guys who had attacked us. And I wanted to support them. You know, I wanted to support the men and women who were doing that, raising their hand, going out there, and taking the fight to the enemy. And so so I volunteered for the USO, and I just started raising my hand to support multiple different nonprofits. And, you know, I would raise money for them, and I would raise awareness by doing PSAs so that they could raise more money to help more people, you know. And there were a lot of different nonprofits in a lot of different military kind of first responder spaces trying to help people. There were people that were trying to help, you know, families that were affected in New York City. You know, we lost 343 firefighters there. We lost 417 total on the day. And then, you know, of course, since then, we've lost quite a few more to 9/11 illness. But I just wanted to help. So I started volunteering wherever I could. I started taking my band out. I just had, it wasn't even a band at that point. It was just, I had some people that I played with for fun every once in a while. I finally got the USO to I'd done a bunch of tours where I go out and shake hands, and I went to Iraq twice in 2003, and I went to Germany and Italy, and I went to Walter Reed, and I went here and there and everywhere and all that. And then in 2004, I finally got the USO to let me take some musicians on one of those tours. And that began, now it's 20 years since I've been taking, you know, it's over 20 years since I've been taking the band out. We played hundreds and hundreds of concerts all over the world. And I just wanted to do more, keep doing more. That's what that documentary on our site is called, Always Do a Little More. Cause I was just like saying that all the time. We always got to do a little more. There's always more to do. And raising my hand for all these nonprofits and everything, that just showed me where all the different needs were and how I could help fill those needs. And eventually, after several years of doing that, you know, just volunteering for all these different things, it became clear that, you know, this was for keeps. You know, I'm not going anywhere.
Yeah.
So the next step is to raise money for my own foundation so that I could expand my mission and expand with a team of people that it was their full-time job. I'm the volunteer, right? So I wanted to have a full-time army whose day job, you know, was going to be, you know, doing more of what I was doing for free.
Yeah.
And that's where the Gary Sinise Foundation came from. And I had built up a solid enough reputation, you know, for service work and being in this space, doing all these different things that, you know, when I decided I needed to name it something, I said, well, I'm going to call it the Gary Sinise Foundation. People know I'm serious about this stuff.
Sure.
You know, they've seen me doing it for multiple years. You know, I've raised millions of dollars for all these other organizations. Now we're just going to try to bring a lot of those efforts under one umbrella.
Yeah.
And call it the Gary Sinise Foundation.
And do you support, is it active duty and veterans? It's veterans and first responders? Is it all of that?
All of it.
All of it.
And families.
Yeah, and families too, right? And it's
because if you look at what I was doing before that, Chris, I mean, that's what I was doing before.
sure. Yeah.
I'm not gonna do all this work on behalf of our active duty and then start an on that doesn't address some things specific to our active duty folks. There are, you know, there are certain programs at the Gary Sinise Foundation that address our active duty folks. One is called Serving Heroes. We're constantly serving food on military bases all over the place, firehouses everywhere. And that program is really, to me, it's more about, it's like I mean, you've probably done this, right? You see some guys over here and they're in a restaurant and they got their uniforms on and stuff, and they're eating, and you quietly pick up the tab on your way out and pay for them. So I was doing that quite a bit, and I thought, let's have an active program where we're just sending a meal and a message to folks. And so serving heroes is we like good food and all of that, but it's really the fact that some young service member can be eating food and see my picture over there, Gary Sinise, something written on a billboard or something that says, "Thank you for what you're doing. We appreciate everything you're doing. We don't forget it." It's the message, it's the message that program is about. And so much of that comes, again, from the Vietnam veterans who didn't get that kind of support when they were serving. Another program that supports active duty as well is my band.
Yeah.
I mean, like I said, I've been on, I think the last count is like 175 bases around the world and at home. Multiple military bases, played all the academies. I mean, just, multiple things, multiple times, and played hundreds of shows. So some of those bases, like I said, I've been on multiple times over the years, visiting or playing concerts or whatever it is. All that is supported by the people who donate to the Gary Sinise Foundation. That allows me to take the band out. We're now sending other entertainment out, because I used to play 50 concerts a year while I was shooting a TV show. I can't do that kind of stuff anymore. But I do about half of that now, but we want to continue that. So now we have a very robust and healthy foundation that is being supported by the American people to allow us to expand our entertainment programs. So we're sending other entertainers out there as well, just like the USO does.
Yeah.
I want people to get that message from Gary Sinise that we don't forget. We care about you. So those are some of the active duty programs. And then there's veterans programs, there's first responder stuff, there's Gold Star family stuff, children, education things, all kinds of stuff at the Gary Sinise Foundation.
Yeah. Yeah. Just quickly on the band thing, do you guys play cover? Is it all covers, or do you have original music that you're playing as well?
Well, actually, I always wanted the band to be kind of a variety show, play a little something for the children of our service members or fallen heroes and older veterans and young active duty folks, everything in between. So it's a cover band that plays a lot of different stuff. But just recently, my son passed away in January, and he was a musician.
Yep.
A really good songwriter and composer. And recently, we learned a couple of his songs that are coming out in an album.
Oh, cool.
On his birthday.
Oh, cool.
So he had one record come out after he died. He made the record with his buddy Oliver.
I listened to it.
Music,
I listened
all
to
of that. It's called Resurrection and Revival. Have you heard it?
Yeah, I listened to it. Yeah, I did. It's great.
All right. Well, there's some beautiful, beautiful music on it. And after he died, I found all kinds of other music that he'd written and tucked away in his computer. And so we're doing a part 2 of Resurrection and Revival that will come out on November 10th. It'll be available. The vinyl will be available at the Gary Sinise Foundation. And there are 2 songs on this. It's a double album. There's 19 compositions on the record. He wrote a lot of stuff, tucked it away. Some stuff goes all the way back to his college days. So we're doing one song that he wrote in college in my band. It's called Angel's Theme. And the last song he wrote in his hospital bed last year that never got finished, but he wrote the chorus. He wrote the chart for it. He started to flesh it out with my violin player in my band. And after he died, I told my violin player, Dan Myers, I said, Dan, finish the song. We're gonna put it on the record.
Yeah.
So we recorded it July 29th here in Nashville, and it's going to be on the record. So we're playing both those songs.
That's cool.
Those are the only original tunes we're doing. Everything else is covers.
Oh, that's really cool. Yeah, I'll definitely check that out when it comes out. Because I said I listened to your son's music. It was great.
Thank you.
So just last couple things here. I want to be respectful of your time, but so I've heard you compared to sort of like the modern Bob Hope, and I hadn't heard that before until recently when someone said that. I was like, yeah, that's a pretty accurate analogy. How do you agree with that? Is that something like that you want to be kind of part of your legacy, so to speak? Is that
Bob Hope? I mean, he was a remarkable guy in what he did, especially in World War II, because those days it was very, very different. I mean, we're in a world war. We have troops everywhere, right? And Bob Hope did a show before Pearl Harbor at March Air Force Base in California. He did his radio show, and he went down there and he did his radio show for the troops, and it was a smash hit. I mean, he thought, this is my audience.
Yeah.
Wow, this is fantastic. And then, in December of 41, all of a sudden there's Pearl Harbor, and we're deploying all over the place. And, we've got a world war going, and, going overseas was not that easy in those days. So if you read Bob Hope's book about his first tour overseas, it's called I Never Left Home. And I mean, they did like 200 shows or something like that. It was ridiculous. They were over there for 3 or 4 months in Italy and all these different places, trying to bop around however they could to get entertainment to the war zones and everything. And it was really a remarkable beginning to what ended up being a 50-year thing for Bob Hope. So he has a gigantic, beautiful legacy. Yeah. His foundation, the Bob and Dolores Hope Foundation, continues to deploy resources and funding all over. They've been a great supporter of ours at the Gary Sinise Foundation. Wonderful folks. His daughter Linda is, in her 80s now. She's on the board. She's one of the board members. And they continue to support a lot of wonderful things in Bob Hope's name, in his legacy. If I can build a foundation like that can last a long time and continue to help a lot of folks that are serving and defending all of us and protecting our cities and all of that, and this can be a resource for them in multiple ways, and a means for them to know that they're appreciated and everything, then I'll feel pretty good when I walk through the pearly gates there and feel like, hey, the movie career turned into something really, really positive to help a lot of people. And I wouldn't have been able to do it without the success in the movie and TV business. Yeah, I had a lot of resources coming out of CSI New York. And I was able to use some of those personal resources to start up the foundation and to take the time to travel around and build up a base of support. And now we have hundreds of thousands of donors. We have wonderful, wonderful corporate partners that are supporting us in multiple ways. And it's a growing foundation. I'll feel good. My family will feel good. Mac will feel good. He loved the foundation. He loved working there. We'll feel good that we've done something positive with life, and it gave purpose to the movie career. And life itself. Yeah,
I think it's an apt comparison. I think it's really, really cool. Very last question here, and it's going to be a little bit long-winded getting to it, or let me actually say the question up front. And the question is, what do you think the right message is to give to veterans these days? Like the way we should, I guess, approach them, and just kind of giving the context of this question. What you do at the Gary Sinise Foundation, there's a lot of intersection with what we do at the Navy SEAL Foundation. Certainly, we serve active duty, we serve veterans. You do first responders. We are obviously committed to the Naval Special Warfare community.
Special operations, yes.
Yeah, but it's but a lot of the same types of programs, families of the fallen and whatnot. But a big component is mental health these days with veterans, and I was actually reading your annual report, and you talk about we've lost, call it 7,000 service members in Iraq and Afghanistan, roughly that number. But the number that always sticks out to me is in that same time frame, we've lost over 30,000 service members and veterans to suicide, right? Which means that's over four times as many. And it always just strikes me that our minds can be deadlier than the enemy. And I just think it's such an important thing. And so what I'm getting to with that is like, how do we address this appropriately? Because I think we've gone from a place where I wasn't really around for Vietnam, but where veterans were being spit on and treated that way when they came home. And now the pendulum certainly swung the opposite way, where there's so much thank you for your service. But at the same time, sometimes I feel like we need to do a little bit more, like you're still needed. You still have a purpose, like you're a valued member to society. Because if we go too far down the path of you're broken and you need so much help and you're so frail and you're so fragile, I almost feel like sometimes it's, I don't want to say counterproductive, but it's not threading the needle exactly correctly. And I just kind of wanted to get your take on this as somebody who's obviously invested in this the same way we are on our end.
Yeah, Chris. Those numbers are always just hard to listen to,
Yeah.
Because so often, how about all those instances where you hear, I didn't know there was anything wrong with them.
Right. Yes.
How many times have we heard that?
Yeah.
Gosh, he seemed fine to me.
Yep.
My mind is totally blown. He never acted funny or anything. And that's hard to very difficult to combat that, or to be proactive in serving somebody who shows no signs of anything to anybody. But one of the things that I've tried to do as a public figure is just to make sure people know that they are cared for, that what they do and what they have gone through is meaningful. It matters. And when we are there for them. I've done multiple campaigns on that front. We have multiple programs, at the Gary Sinise Foundation, that are all about wellness, and trying to address these things. I'm talking to our folks now about, being much more proactive with what I do on stage at the concerts, right? So I've what's been interesting is that there have been multiple instances where somebody has contacted me after a concert or an event or an appearance or a visit, and they have told me that was that they turned in the other direction after that moment. One letter came in with a guy that was going to go out to the desert that night, but he saw a poster that I was playing, and he said, well, I'll go to that and then I'll go to the desert. And he came and he enjoyed himself with the music, but he also heard what I was saying, which made a difference,
Yeah.
And he changed his mind. If there's some way that somebody like me, who they know is invested in them, can get that message out in a broader way, I want to continue to try to do that. And I wasn't standing up there saying, okay, everybody out there who's thinking of doing something bad,
Right.
Don't do it.
Yeah.
All I was saying was how much I care about them.
Yep.
And how much what they do matters, and how necessary and important they are to our country, and how we don't want them or their families to struggle or suffer, because of raising their hand and going to defend our country. We don't want that, and we want them to know. So I just talk to them from my heart. So we have some great wellness things that we're involved with. One is called the are you aware of the Avalon Action Alliance?
No, I'm not.
But you can look up Avalon Action Alliance. That's all wellness stuff. We're involved with several programs all over the place. I'm one of the, one of the sort of sponsors of it, my foundation, but we have a lot of wonderful things going. And we're serving a lot of people. A lot of people are going through these programs. The challenge is that one of the challenges is awareness raising that these programs exist, right? I mean, you probably face the same thing. You want people to know.
Yes.
The SEAL community is smaller, so you're not affecting, you're not talking the broader whole military world or anything like that. So little bit different kind of challenge, but raising awareness for where those programs are. And there are a lot of good programs out there that are saving lives, that are doing good work, saving lives. Raising awareness for them is one thing, but raising too much awareness, to the point, like, for example, with the Avalon Action Alliance, we have multiple sites all around the country, all these different retreats and different things that are going on. Very, 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 very good programs. We're getting a lot of great feedback from everybody that goes through them. But if we were to make that, widely known to the community, we wouldn't be able to serve everybody. We'd be saying, we got a waiting list now of 9 months. You don't want to have somebody call you up and need the services that you're trying to provide, need them right now. And you say, well, let me put you on the schedule for December, No, they need them right now. I mean, this is this is a matter of life and death, sometimes. And so there's a fine line that we have to walk between saying too much and saying too little, because we want to be able to accommodate everybody possible. So, one of our, are you aware of Boulder Crest? Boulder Crest is another wonderful program that we have. It's got multiple sites around the country. We've opened them up all kinds of places. My foundation is a big supporter. We started a big program, almost 10 years ago, where we were pairing up young Afghanistan, Iraq veterans who were struggling with guys from the DAV, Vietnam guys, guys who came back missing 3 limbs, and they have survived and thrived for 45 years or 50 years, whatever it is. And you're pairing up with somebody who's just 1 year into their disability, and that person is looking at a guy who's, successful real estate guy or whatever it is, and he's missing his limbs and everything. He went to Vietnam, difficult time coming back from Vietnam, but how did this guy survive and thrive? So very, very positive program to show some young guy that there's life after the battle. We want to be there. I always say we want to be there before, during, and after the battle. So there's a lot of different things. Is there one solution, one thing that you can say to address the problem? No, of course not. But there are multiple great organizations like yours and all these different organizations, the Avalon Action Network, all these Hope for the Warriors, Boulder Crest Foundation, all these different things that I'm doing that I've been a part of for many years, that are doing great work out there, and they're helping a lot of people. If people just know that, and if it's a battle buddy who knows it, and the guy who's struggling doesn't, then it's the battle buddy who needs to pick that guy up and say, let's go. Let's go. But again, very difficult problem if there are no signs, never see any signs.
Sure. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, it is. It's super complex and it's complicated and difficult. But I just, when I think of your personal character arc as a human, like your life, it goes all the way back to that first kind of theater experience. And to me, that just when I read it, or I guess when I listened to it, it's that community and purpose thing. Like, to me, that just stands out as the thing that we always need to get back to, of like, if you have community and purpose, I just think you can thrive, to your point. And it's not a survival thing. Like, we don't want to just survive. We want to thrive. We want to have value. And I just think that figuring that out is the challenge. Like, that's where we need to do. We need
Chris,
to do.
You made me think about something. You know, we try to promote this at the Gary Sinise Foundation. We have education programs. It all just comes from stuff I've tried to do over the years. And I tell this story about September 11th and just being, you know, like so many of us, just devastated by what just happened.
Yeah.
I mean, man, people jumping out of buildings, and, you know, I mean, it was just awful. And heartbreak, just terrible heartbreak, right? My heart was just broken. I was shaking and crying from what had happened. And I took my family to our church the Friday after the Tuesday. And because President Bush had kind of set up Friday after September 11th as a national day of prayer and remembrance for the victims of 9/11. And the churches and synagogues, you know, every house of worship across the country was just packed on that day, packed. And there was no place for us to stand or to sit. So we stood on the side, and I'm holding my little daughter's hand. The priest is talking, and I'm crying, sing God Bless America. It was very powerful. And I remember something from that moment that just spoke to me, or about service and the healing power in service work. And I needed to heal this broken heart. And so that's when I started raising my hand. And then I raised my hand again, and then again and again and again. The more I raised, the more I wanted to raise, and the more I went out there and did, and the more relief I felt that I was now part of helping our citizens, a lot of them families that were dealing with long deployments, and, you know, their loved ones gone and in the war zone, and people are getting killed and all this stuff, and families are struggling, all that. I was just playing a role in being a part of helping them through that. And that helped me through my own things.
Yeah.
And I would recommend that to anyone for for a broken heart. I know that, you know, losing our son has been the most devastating thing in our family. Fighting cancer for 6 years and watching him go through that, and then losing him, that was just, it's heartbreaking and hard. But at the same time, through it all, I would go out and play concert, or I would go to the hospital, or I'd go dish out some beans at a firehouse, or whatever it was. And I would always come back nourished.
Yeah.
And replenished, and prepared to face another day with a little more armor.
Yeah.
And I recommend that to anybody.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, let's leave it at that. I think that's a great note to end on. So look, thanks for your time today. Thanks for all that you do. Certainly for all of us here that are sort of in the veteran military nonprofit space. Obviously, we're all on the same team here. We've got slightly different missions and serving slightly different people, and there's some overlap there, but we're all on the same team. So yeah, thanks for all of that. And I will say, occasionally I come to Nashville to do some of my own music recording. And so, and I,
Yes, please look me up.
I was going to say, and most of my stuff it's nothing to write home about, but it's mainly songs about kind of the veteran experience. So if you're around and you're interested in laying down a bass track, I will definitely, I'll give you a shout.
Let me know. I'd love for you too to come by the foundation.
Yeah.
meet the team. It started with me and a couple other people, and now we have over 70 people that work for the Gary Sinise Foundation.
Yeah.
We have so many programs going on all over the country and all the time. It's a big foundation. I have a bunch of SEAL pals,
I'm sure you do.
they're
I'm sure you do.
good pals that I've met, just wonderful people I've met serving our country over the years who've inspired me. So now I know you, and I hope you come look me up when you're here.
I will take you up on that. Thank you, sir. All right, Gary, take care. Thank you so much.
God bless, Chris. Thank you.
See ya. Thanks for listening to On the X, the official podcast of the Navy SEAL Foundation, an Ironclad original series sponsored by Mechanics Wear. You can learn more about the foundation and get involved at NavySEALFoundation.org. You can also text the word On the X to 60104 to join our text subscriber list. See you next time.